I sat at the far end of the conference table, fingers flying across my laptop keyboard as the annual board meeting of Brooks Tech Dynamics got underway. The minimalist all-glass boardroom overlooked the hazy skyline of Palo Alto, bathed in morning light, but inside the room, it was as cold and sharp as the steel chairs we sat on. My father, Charles Brooks, stood confidently at the head of the table in one of his signature navy blue suits. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a Fortune magazine cover shoot, silver hair combed back, tailored to perfection, voice booming with authority. He didn't need a mic. When he spoke, people listened, or at least they pretended to. To his left, my brother Tyler Brooks leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his smartwatch with all the focus of a man playing Flappy Bird, instead of participating in what should have been the most important meeting of the quarter. His crisp designer suit was wasted on his slouched posture and complete lack of interest. I, Madeline Brooks, his younger sister and executive assistant, was, as always, the invisible one. Never mind that I had an MBA in strategic finance from Yale. Never mind that I had cleaned up 2 near-fatal product launches in the last 2 years. In their eyes, I was the one who fetched coffee, booked travel, and scheduled meetings. A glorified secretary. The conversation circled around company growth, international expansion, and a string of buzzwords Charles loved throwing around: vision, future-proofing, global reach. I typed diligently, documenting everything, as if my diligence alone could justify my place in that room. Then Charles cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "We need to start thinking seriously about succession," he said. Here we go again. I kept my eyes on the screen, though I felt the blood rush to my face. Every year, he made the same vague announcement. Every year, he dangled leadership like a carrot. And every year, the unspoken reality stayed the same. It was always going to be Tyler. "I'm not getting any younger," he continued, allowing a dramatic pause. "And I want to ensure the future of Brooks Tech remains in the hands of someone with vision, someone who understands what this company stands for." His eyes didn't even flicker toward me. They went straight to Tyler. "My son Tyler has the charisma and foresight to take this company into its next chapter." I didn't flinch, not visibly anyway. Tyler finally looked up, smirking. "Thanks, Dad. I won't let you down." "You already have," I wanted to scream, 12 times. But no one in this room ever cared enough to notice. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a second before I resumed typing. Just a note-taker. That's all I was to them. Charles continued, outlining vague plans for a leadership transition by summer. The board nodded, murmured in agreement. Then, just to add salt to the wound, he chuckled. "And of course, Madeline will continue keeping the meetings on time and the coffee strong." Polite chuckles echoed around the room. A few heads turned toward me, half apologetic, half amused. I smiled. Of course I did. "Honestly," Tyler said, leaning forward with a wink, "I think Maddie's real talent is remembering everyone's lunch orders." "Hey, that's a valuable skill," one of the board members quipped. I smiled again, teeth clenched so tightly I thought my jaw might crack. They didn't know. They didn't know that I'd been the one who revised the pitch deck that saved our San Diego robotics deal. They didn't know that I'd quietly pulled the plug on the disastrous bioframe prototype before it could ruin us legally. They didn't know that I'd built the budget forecast that convinced our investors to stay on board last winter. And they certainly didn't know that I owned 51% of this company. That part was still my secret. The room shifted to discussing future projections. Miles Keating, the smug transition consultant Charles had hired, stood to present a slide deck. "Based on our leadership evaluation," Miles said, "we propose naming Tyler Brooks as interim CEO starting Q2 with a full transition plan by year-end." Tyler grinned like he'd just won an Oscar. I felt my stomach twist. I kept my expression neutral, fingers typing notes I'd never send to anyone. Miles clicked through meaningless graphs. Charles nodded. The board murmured approval. The vote was all but done. Until Charles said, "Let's draft the initial documents. Tyler takes over by summer. Everyone in favor?" Hands lifted one by one, without hesitation. Every hand but mine. Charles looked mildly amused. "Maddie?" I shut my laptop slowly and looked up for the first time. "I think we should revisit who actually owns this company before you start assigning titles." Dead silence. Tyler blinked. What? I stood up, lifted my briefcase from beside my chair, and pulled out a thick, embossed leather folder. I've been quiet for a long time, I said, voice calm. I let you all laugh, underestimate, dismiss, but I've also been watching, studying, taking notes. Charles's face darkened. What are you playing at, Madeline? I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward him. You remember the trust Mom left me? I asked. The one you said was too complex for me to handle? Turns out it wasn't. One by one, I handed copies to each board member. The trust activated last quarter, I continued. The revenue benchmarks were met, and full share ownership transferred to me. Tyler stood abruptly. You're lying. You can verify the documents, I said. Fiona already has. Fiona Green, the company's legal counsel, glanced up, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. They're legitimate, she said. As of 3 weeks ago, Madeline owns 51% of Brooks Tech voting shares. Tyler stared at me in disbelief. Charles's face went ghost white. Madeline, he said, voice low and threatening. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I replied. And I'm done letting you pretend I don't. I reopened my laptop, not for notes this time. A presentation loaded on the screen. Title slide, Redefining Brooks Tech, From Legacy to Leadership. As the room watched in stunned silence, I clicked to the next slide. This is what leadership actually looks like. Silence. Not the kind that falls after a joke bombs, but the kind that crashes like a thunderclap and smothers everything beneath it. No one in the boardroom moved. Not Charles, not Tyler, not even Fiona Green, our icy corporate counsel. I stood there, calm on the outside, while my heart beat like a war drum beneath my blazer. I had been preparing for this moment for 18 months, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the expression on my father's face. What the hell are you talking about, Madeline? He asked. His voice was low, but the edges were sharp. I walked slowly toward him and placed the leather folder in front of him with a steady hand. Then I distributed copies to each board member. These are the original trust documents from my mother's estate, along with the verification from our legal team, I said. The trust was activated once the company's quarterly revenue surpassed the milestone she outlined. That happened last quarter during the San Diego robotics deal. I turned to the board. At that point, the voting shares, 51% to be exact, transferred to me. Tyler stood up so fast his chair screeched backward. This is bullshit. Fiona cleared her throat softly and adjusted her glasses. I've reviewed the paperwork, she said, her voice clipped and professional. It's legally sound. Charles leaned forward, flipping through the documents with trembling fingers. You hid this from me. No, I replied. You never cared to look. I submitted the trust update 2 years ago. You said, and I quote, just give it to legal. They'll deal with it. You treated your own daughter like an errand runner. Turns out that errand changed everything. He stared at me, lips tight, eyes narrowing. This is a mistake. It's not, I said calmly. It's a correction. Tyler rounded the table, grabbing one of the documents and holding it up. This is fraud. You used insider knowledge. You work here. Fiona's voice cut through his panic. Tyler, you're not helping. Shut up, Fiona. She manipulated the system. She followed the rules, Fiona said flatly. Better than most of us. Charles slammed the document down and stood up. His voice dropped to a low growl. You think you can waltz in here with a few papers and run my company? It's not your company anymore, I said. It never fully was. Mom made sure of that. A hush settled again. Her name hadn't been spoken in that room in years. My mother, Elaine Brooks, quiet, dignified, and infinitely smarter than anyone gave her credit for, had been the one to plant the seed of all this. She'd seen how I was being treated, how my father groomed Tyler for power, and how I was told to stay in my lane. She made sure I wouldn't be stuck in that lane forever. I turned my laptop toward the board and clicked to the next slide. Financial integrity audit, last 24 months. This is what I've been working on while Tyler was busy rehearsing keynotes and buying engagement on social media, I said. We've lost over $14 million in inefficiencies and unapproved executive bonuses. We've also spent nearly $3 million settling quiet HR complaints, most of them tied to Tyler's division. The board shuffled. Some avoided eye contact. I propose an immediate freeze on discretionary executive spending, I continued, and a performance-based evaluation across all leadership roles, including interim CEO appointments. Tyler sneered. You want to fire me? I want to protect the company, I replied, from reckless decisions, from nepotism, from image over substance. He turned to Charles, desperation creeping in. Dad, say something. But Charles said nothing. I stepped forward, clicking again. Let's talk about this new structure, one that values contribution over last names. A new slide appeared, Brooks Tech 2.0. From legacy to leadership. I outlined a merit-based review system, mandatory ethics training for executives, a new internal reporting system for whistleblowers, a commitment to innovation driven by diverse talent. The board listened, not politely, but attentively. Some leaned forward, some nodded. I've been invisible in this room for years, I said, but I've also been listening. I've heard your frustrations, seen your concerns buried in reports. I'm here to tell you that era is over. Fiona folded her arms and looked at Charles. Unless the board has a legal basis to dispute Madeline's ownership, we should move forward with her proposal. Tyler looked like he might implode. You're going to let her take everything? You gave everything away, I said. Every time you passed off someone else's work as yours. Every time you bullied an intern. Every time you walked into this building thinking you were untouchable. Charles finally spoke. And what gives you the right to think you can run this? I stared him straight in the eye. The right? You gave me the responsibility. You just didn't notice. He looked confused. You remember that emergency with the Tokyo partnership last year? I asked. You were in Aspen. Tyler was too swamped to respond. I handled it, quietly. That deal? It saved our Q3 numbers. He looked away. Remember when the Arizona AI project went off budget by $6 million? You blamed procurement. I found the leak, renegotiated the contracts, and got us back on track. I let it sink in. Let them think about all the times things magically got resolved while they were on golf courses or wine tours. You thought I was just taking notes, I said, but I was documenting everything. There was a beat, then two. Then one of the board members, Lena Castillo, VP of Research, cleared her throat. I'd like to hear more about this new internal reporting system, she said. And just like that, the tide shifted. Tyler muttered something under his breath and sank into his chair. Charles sat down, his face gray. The others began asking questions. Real ones, engaged, curious. For the first time, they weren't just humoring me. I answered every question with data, strategy, vision, and not once did I glance at Charles for approval. By the end of the presentation, the board voted unanimously to approve the proposal. Tyler was removed from his interim role. Charles's involvement was formally limited to an advisory capacity with no executive powers. As the room emptied, Charles stood slowly, glaring at me. You think you're clever, don't you, using my own tactics against me? I packed my laptop and calmly met his stare. No, I said, I used my own. He scoffed. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but not today. As I turned to leave, I paused at the doorway. Oh, and Tyler? I called over my shoulder. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. You have until 5 p.m. to vacate your office. Security has already been briefed. I walked out, head high, heart pounding. Outside, my assistant Camilla waited with a fresh folder of reports and a knowing smile. Everything go according to plan? She asked. I smiled back. Exactly as planned. The boardroom victory had felt satisfying. For about 12 minutes. By the time I got back to my office, the high had given way to the weight. Everything was quiet. And not the good kind. The air was thick with tension, as though the building itself had been holding its breath. Camilla, my assistant, handed me a folder of HR inquiries and whispered, People are talking. Like really talking? I nodded. Let them. They need to.
Shani-san.
What I didn't say was how much I was already anticipating the backlash. Sure enough, within the hour, I received 3 emails from department heads, half polite, half panicked, asking for clarification on the leadership transition. My inbox exploded with message threads titled, Re-Urgent Tyler, and question, Mr. Brooks' future role? My phone buzzed like it was trying to escape my desk. Charles locked himself in his office. Tyler vanished completely. Some said he stormed out the side exit. Others claimed he was in the parking garage, screaming into his Bluetooth. I couldn't care less. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't cleaning up their mess. I was exposing it. HR pinged me a message. We've already received 17 anonymous notes thanking you. Some said it's the first time they've felt safe in years. I stared at that message for a long moment, not because it surprised me, but because it broke my heart. The rot in this company had run deeper than I even imagined. Later that evening, just as I was packing up, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was from Aunt May, my mom's younger sister. Madeline, I just heard. I don't know how you did it, but your mother would be so proud. You did what none of us could. You stood up to him, and you won. I sank into my chair, eyes burning. I hadn't cried in over a year. I thought maybe I couldn't anymore. But her voice cracked something open. For a second, I just let it sit. That strange mix of triumph and grief. I missed my mother more than I had in a long time, and somehow I felt closer to her than ever. The next morning, I arrived early. Camilla met me at the elevator, eyes wide. There's someone waiting for you, she said. Unscheduled, not happy. I braced myself. Who? Vanessa, Tyler's wife. She was pacing in my office when I walked in, heels clacking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her designer tote was tossed dramatically on the couch, and she spun around with fire in her eyes the moment I entered. You arrogant little bitch, she spat. Good morning to you too, I said calmly, stepping past her to hang up my coat. Do you have any idea what you've done? We just bought a house in Napa. We were supposed to host a 4th of July fundraiser for the hospital foundation next month. Do you know how this looks? Like accountability, I said. Like disaster is what it looks like, she hissed. Tyler is devastated. Charles had to be sedated yesterday. The country club is already buzzing. I sat down behind my desk, calmly opening my laptop. Vanessa, I don't run this company based on the gossip circles of bored wives and real estate agents. Excuse me? She said, almost screeching. I slid a folder across the desk. Here. Since you're so invested in your husband's reputation, I figured you'd want to see what he's been up to. She hesitated, opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, hotel receipts, and HR complaint logs, every one tied to Tyler's misconduct. Trips paid for with company money. Inappropriate texts to interns. A record of hush money payments authorized by Charles to quiet down problems before they reached legal. She paled. He said they were lying, she whispered. They weren't, I said softly. And you know that. You've known for years. You just didn't want to deal with it. She sat down, stunned. Her hand trembled as she flipped the page. We just bought a house, she said again weakly. We have a baby on the way. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, I saw past the designer mask. That's not my problem, I said gently. But if you want advice, check the prenup. There's a clause about infidelity. You'll be fine. She stared at me, speechless, tears gathering in the corners of her perfectly mascaraed eyes. Then she stood, snatched her purse, and stormed out. That afternoon, I got a call from Richard Donnelly, my father's longtime personal attorney. Miss Brooks, he began, I've been asked to reach out on behalf of Charles Brooks. He intends to challenge the legality of the trust activation and your subsequent acquisition of majority shares. On what grounds? I asked. He's alleging insider influence, unfair advantage, and violation of internal conflict policies. I didn't blink. You tell Charles that I have full documentation of every financial decision he's made in the last decade, including the slush fund he used to pay off whistleblowers and the misclassified expenses filed as consulting fees. If he wants a public trial, I'd be more than happy to accommodate. There was a long pause. I'll advise him against further action, Donnelly said, voice tight. Wise choice, I replied. I hung up and exhaled. That evening, as the building emptied out, I stood alone in the executive wing. For the first time, Charles's nameplate had been removed from the CEO office door. It hadn't been replaced yet, but the emptiness felt symbolic, a quiet victory. Camilla joined me a few moments later. So, what now? Now? I said. Now we rebuild. And I meant it. Not just the company, not just the culture. We were rebuilding the soul of a place that had lost its way. And I would make damn sure we didn't lose it again. If tearing down the old order had been the war, then this part, putting something better in its place, was the rebuilding after the bomb. No drama, no applause, just long hours, hard choices, and a growing list of broken systems. And it started the morning after Charles officially cleared his office. I stood at the center of the executive floor, newly redesigned into an open-concept collaboration space, and looked around at the team I'd personally chosen to meet with first. Jordan Reyes, quiet, brilliant. Latino software engineer who'd been buried in middle management for 5 years, while Tyler took credit for most of his innovations. Grace Lynn, former intern turned HR specialist. She'd once flagged an inappropriate email chain from a senior exec and had nearly been fired for it. I remembered that because I was the one who stepped in quietly and rerouted the investigation to protect her. And a few others, faces the old regime had ignored or belittled. I was bringing them to the table now. Let's talk about the future, I said, pulling out my chair. The next 3 months were a blur of spreadsheets, restructuring memos, interviews, and 14-hour days. But every second felt earned. I launched a company-wide employee feedback initiative, anonymously collecting grievances and suggestions. The inbox exploded. Stories poured in of harassment ignored, ideas stolen, promotions blocked, and credit misassigned. We reviewed every submission. When patterns emerged, I didn't hesitate. 3 VPs were quietly let go. Not with golden parachutes, but with cause. Jordan Reyes was promoted to head of innovation, and the first thing he did was open up the codebase of our most ambitious AI project, one Tyler had shelved because it wasn't sexy enough for investors. Within weeks, Jordan's team had a prototype running in beta. Grace Lynn was appointed chief of staff responsible for rebuilding the company's internal culture. She introduced a new code of conduct, rolled out a whistleblower protection platform, and facilitated listening sessions across departments. Weekly executive meetings no longer happened behind closed doors. We streamed town halls every Friday. Questions could be submitted anonymously. I answered them all, live. It was uncomfortable, vulnerable, honest. And it worked. Productivity increased. Voluntary resignations dropped. We weren't just fixing the numbers. We were fixing the soul of the place. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some of the old guard watched from the sidelines, whispering, waiting for me to fail. Charles tried, twice, to organize a shareholder coup. Both times, he failed. The second attempt was particularly pitiful. A secret dinner with concerned investors that leaked within 24 hours. I walked into the boardroom the next morning to find him seated in the corner, stiff and silent. Still clinging to old alliances? I asked. He didn't respond. Just so you know, I added, the board voted yesterday to remove your emeritus status. He blinked, slowly. You've made your point. I'm not making a point, I said. I'm keeping a promise. He left without another word. The press caught wind of the turnaround within weeks. Forbes ran a short piece titled, From Coffee Girl to CEO, Madeline Brooks Reshapes a Silicon Valley Giant. Then came Fast Company, Business Insider, TechCrunch. I wasn't seeking attention, but I wasn't hiding either. For every article that praised me, there were anonymous comments calling me cold, calculated, another overcorrective feminist stunt. I didn't care. Let them be uncomfortable. I didn't come here to make them feel safe. I came here to make them better. Meanwhile, Tyler's world crumbled. First came the divorce papers. Vanessa had clearly taken my advice, or the prenup clause, more precisely. I heard through legal that she walked away with the Napa house, 2 luxury vehicles, and a very generous settlement. Then came the lawsuits. 3 former interns filed harassment claims, all supported by the whistleblower platform we'd just launched. Tyler's name was everywhere. He texted me once, "You win. Happy now?" I didn't respond. It wasn't about winning. It was about ending something toxic and starting something better. Late one night, after a 16-hour day, I found myself back in the archives, a storage room filled with old records, photos, and dusty boxes no one had touched in years. I was looking for a set of original patents, but what I found instead was my mother's journal. It had been stored in a labeled folder. Elaine B., Personal Notes. I sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read. Page after page in her familiar cursive, reflections, thoughts, ideas she never spoke aloud. One entry stopped me cold. Madeline has a quiet kind of strength. Charles doesn't see it. He never will. But I do. I just hope she never forgets what she's capable of. Another. Never let love or legacy stop you from doing what's right, even if it breaks you. I closed the journal slowly, tears stinging my eyes. It didn't break me, Mom. It made me. Weeks passed. The culture shift deepened. Engineers from top schools started applying again, not because of pay, but because they wanted to work somewhere that actually gave a damn. Jordan's AI prototype, now dubbed Athena, got picked up by an early-stage medical tech firm for testing. Grace oversaw a full overhaul of our onboarding system, mentorship programs, and internal promotions model. And best of all, for the first time in company history, Brooks Tech hit a 96% employee satisfaction rate. We weren't just surviving. We were leading. One Friday afternoon, as I wrapped up a meeting, Camilla poked her head into my office. "HR's final report just came in," she said, handing me the folder. "We've officially resolved every outstanding complaint from the past 5 years." I blinked. "Every one?" She nodded. "And I think you should see page 7. I flipped through. It was a handwritten thank you letter. No name, just a sentence. "For the first time, I don't dread coming to work. Thank you for fighting for us." I sat in silence for a long time. That one line meant more than all the headlines. We weren't done, but we had come so far. 1 year. That's how long it had been since I stood in that boardroom and turned the world upside down with a folder and a voice no one expected to matter. And now? Now, Brooks Tech was unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The office buzzed with energy, not dread. Engineers no longer feared speaking up. Marketing no longer tiptoed around executive egos. The toxic cloud that had loomed over us like a second ceiling had been cleared, replaced by something far rarer: purpose. The Athena project, once buried under red tape and Tyler's indifference, had been picked up by a global healthcare firm. It was now being used to improve early diagnosis for neurological disorders. The press called it a triumph of ethical AI. Our new HR model was being studied at Stanford Business School. Our code of ethics had been adopted by 3 other mid-sized tech companies. And the numbers? Let's just say our investors were finally smiling for the right reasons. Our stock had climbed 47%, but none of that compared to what I saw when I walked the halls each day. The quiet confidence in people who used to shrink back, the joy, the pride, and somehow, after everything, I'd found my own. The annual gala was scheduled for the first Friday of June, held at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown San Francisco. The ballroom was bathed in soft gold light, flowers lined the stage, and every major tech outlet had a reporter in the room. I wore a deep green dress, my mother's favorite color. When I stepped up to the podium, the room quieted. I paused, taking it all in. These weren't just employees. They were survivors, builders, people who had endured the worst and still chosen to stay. "My name is Madeline Brooks," I began, "and this company was never meant to be mine." A few puzzled looks. I wasn't raised to lead. I was raised to support. I was told my job was to take notes, schedule meetings, and make coffee. I did all those things. But I also rebuilt our Tokyo division. I recovered our San Diego deal, and I protected our people when no one else would. I looked up, eyes locking with Grace and Jordan in the front row. And still, they said I was too soft, too quiet, too invisible. I smiled. So I became exactly what they feared most, a woman who doesn't need their approval to lead. The applause started small, then built, rising like a wave. I felt it in my chest. Not pride, not ego, peace. After the event, I stepped outside to get some air. The city lights blinked across the bay. It was quiet, calm, until I heard the voice. "You made something beautiful out of my mistakes." I turned slowly. There he was, Charles Brooks. He looked older, smaller, not physically, but emotionally. His suit hung looser on him. His shoulders slumped ever so slightly. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand that shook as he raised it toward me. "I didn't expect you to come," I said. "Wasn't invited." I didn't deny it. He took a sip. "You were right, about Tyler, about everything." "That's not what I needed to hear," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly. "I may have been wrong about a lot of things." "Try most," I said, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, a genuine dry chuckle that caught even him off guard. "I deserve that." "You deserve worse," I replied. He didn't argue. There was silence for a while. Then, "Is there any chance we could start over?" he asked. I studied him, really looked at him. Behind the fall from power, behind the arrogance, behind the legacy he clung to like armor, I saw a man who had finally run out of excuses. "We can't start over," I said quietly, "but if you're willing to acknowledge what you did and start acting like someone I can respect, we might be able to move forward." He nodded, slowly, as if he understood that was more than he had a right to hope for. "Not as father and daughter," I added. "Not yet, but maybe as business associates." Charles chuckled again, this time with something like regret in his eyes. "Fair enough." A week later, we held our quarterly board meeting. Same room, same table. But everything was different. I sat at the head now. No one questioned it. The meeting began with a review of our next expansion: Latin American partnerships, STEM scholarship initiatives, and potential sustainability investments. Jordan presented the AI team's next phase. Grace laid out employee wellness metrics. As Camilla passed around espresso in fine ceramic cups, I caught Charles eyeing me across the table. I poured my own cup. I said casually, "it turns out I'm actually terrible at making coffee." A few board members chuckled, "but I'm damn good at running a Fortune 500 company." Even Charles smiled at that. That night, I stayed late, as I often did. The office was quiet. Golden light spilled across the floor. I walked down the hallway and paused at the wall of past CEOs. My father's portrait still hung there, next to a space reserved for me. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't need to. He had made his choices, and now, so had I. Back in my office, I pulled open a drawer and looked at a photo. Me in a cap and gown, standing beside my mother on graduation day. Her hand rested on my shoulder, her eyes full of pride. "Never let love or legacy stop you from doing what's right, even if it breaks you." That line echoed in my head. It didn't break me. It built me. And now I was building something better, not just for me, but for every quiet girl who was ever told to stay in her lane. Because the best revenge, it isn't destroying those who doubted you. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be. And more, so much more.